The Galactic Confederation Summit is the most prestigious gathering in the known universe. 2,843 species, all represented in one gargantuan chamber, carved from a hollowed-out asteroid orbiting the neutral star system of Betelgeuse. That's not counting the various subspecies, splinter factions, and assorted hangers-on that somehow wrangled invitations. I'm Ambassador Crix of the Zentharian Commonwealth, and as the designated recorder for this cycle's proceedings, it's my job to notice things. My species evolved from what you might call hyper-observant apex predators. 6 eyes, each capable of tracking individual dust motes across a room. 4 brain hemispheres constantly processing every detail. Olfactory receptors that can detect a single molecule of pheromone from 3 chambers away. So trust me when I say there's something weird about the humans. Don't get me wrong. Physically, there's nothing impressive about them. Bilateral symmetry, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head. Standard template for carbon-based life. No natural armor, no venomous appendages, no telepathic capabilities. Their strength-to-mass ratio is laughable compared to the Targons. Their sensory perception is primitive next to the Voldari. Their reaction time is glacial compared to the Nyx Collective. And yet, for the 5th consecutive summit, the human delegation has arrived precisely 14 minutes before the official start time. Not 15, not 13, 14. They've performed perfunctory greetings with exactly 17 other species, always the same 17, before making their way to the absolute back row of the chamber. The back row. The worst seats in the house. Ambassador Crix. Delightful to see you again, the human delegate Ambassador Reynolds approached with that bizarre facial contortion they call a smile. How's the recording duty treating you? Adequately, I replied, 2 of my eyes tracking his movement while the others scanned his 4 companions. Though I must inquire. Let me guess, Reynolds interrupted, displaying those flat, blunt teeth. You're wondering why we always choose these terrible seats. I fluttered my sensory membranes in acknowledgement. Poor acoustics, offered one of the other humans, Ambassador Torres. We can't hear well from the center of the chamber. A lie. My analysis of human auditory capabilities indicates they function optimally in the middle rows. Less distracting, suggested another, Dr. Fleming, their scientific attaché. Easier to focus on the proceedings. Another lie. Human attention spans improve with direct visual engagement. Honestly, the seats are more comfortable back here, said Reynolds with a shrug. The Confederation really should upgrade their furniture budget. 3 lies in rapid succession. Fascinating. As the chamber began to fill with the galaxy's most powerful beings, the crystalline axiom lords, drifting in on anti-gravity platforms, the massive crawl delegates requiring reinforced flooring sections. The gaseous mist elders contained in their ornate pressure vessels, I couldn't help but notice other details about the human delegation. Unlike every other species, they carried no ceremonial weapons. Their formal attire, while colorful by Confederation standards, contained none of the usual status indicators or achievement markers. Their electronic devices were conspicuously basic models, lacking the ostentatious displays favored by most species. And they were the only delegation that had systematically counted the steps to each exit. I've watched them do it every year, casually pacing out distances while pretending to admire the architecture. The Grand Arbiter's resonant tone signaled the start of proceedings. Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Confederation, we gather once more in the spirit of unity and progress. As the familiar platitudes washed over the assembly, I kept 2 eyes fixed on the human delegation. Reynolds caught my gaze and nodded slightly, that strange smile appearing again as he settled into his chair, exactly 2 meters from the nearest emergency exit. Most curious indeed. The first time I encountered humans was nearly 8 galactic standard years ago. I wasn't an ambassador then, merely a junior diplomatic observer assigned to the First Contact Committee. Nobody expected much from Sol 3. The preliminary scans showed a Type 0.73 civilization barely managing controlled fusion, with primitive computational systems and transportation limited to their own solar system. The Galactic Confederation only noticed them because they wouldn't stop broadcasting their existence into space like excited hatchlings. Careful with the approach, Vector Commander Zrel had instructed our contact vessel. These new species are often jumpy. If only we'd known. The human delegate chosen to meet us was one Dr. Gregory Martinez, apparently some kind of knowledge specialist in xenolinguistics, whatever that was. We'd prepared the standard welcome packet universal translator implants, basic technology gifts, and the preliminary membership application for the Galactic Confederation. Our ship settled onto the designated landing zone, a flat, empty field in what they called Nevada, as atmospheric seals engaged and gravity normalizers completed their calibration. Zrel addressed the contact team. Remember protocol. Slow movements, no threatening postures. These are primitive beings who have never encountered advanced life. The entry ramp descended with appropriately dramatic fog effects. The Confederation Public Relations Division insisted on these theatrics for first contacts, and we emerged to meet humanity's representative. I'll never forget what happened next. Dr. Martinez sprinted toward us, arms waving, face contorted into what we later learned was an expression of enthusiasm. 3 security drones automatically targeted him as a threat. Commander Zrel nearly activated the defense field. "Hello, welcome to Earth," Martinez shouted in his native language before we'd even activated the translators. "This is amazing. Are you comfortable in our atmosphere? Do you need anything? Water? Snacks? Bathroom breaks?" The entire contact team froze. Never in 26 previous first contacts had a species reacted with such inappropriate familiarity. "You will address the Galactic Confederation representatives with proper," Zrel began, but Martinez was already circling our ship, examining it with unconstrained curiosity. Incredible propulsion system design. Gravitational manipulation? Some kind of space folding technology? The energy requirements must be enormous. He paused, looking directly at me. "You have 6 eyes. That's so efficient for observational data collection." I remember feeling oddly flattered. The formal integration of humanity into the Galactic Confederation happened with unprecedented speed after that. Not because we were particularly impressed with them, quite the opposite. The High Council simply wanted to contain the chaos that seemed to follow humans everywhere. Better to have them inside the system than operating independently, High Councilor Vexag reasoned. They're harmless but unpredictable, like keeping a pet Crindling, messy but entertaining. The human delegation sent to the first Confederation Summit was led by Ambassador Reynolds, a seasoned diplomat by their standards. Yet even he seemed incapable of following basic interstellar protocols. "So this chair adjusts for different physiologies. Neat," he'd exclaimed during the formal seating assignment ceremony, accidentally activating the quantum comfort settings and briefly experiencing existence in 3 dimensions simultaneously. The Axiom Lords were scandalized. The Mist Elders pulsated with disapproval. The Krull representatives made that low, rumbling sound that universally translates to primitives. The humans, for their part, seemed oblivious to their status in the Confederation. While other newly admitted species typically spent decades in quiet observation, learning the complex power dynamics of galactic politics, the humans immediately began proposing initiatives, suggesting procedural changes, and worst of all, trying to befriend everyone. "Have you tried coffee?" Ambassador Torres asked the Supreme Hive Commander of the Vrex Dominion during a recess in proceedings. The Vrex, whose species had conquered 16 solar systems and were famous for dissolving opponents in psychic acid, actually accepted the brown liquid offering. It caused a diplomatic incident that required 3 days of negotiation to resolve. Apparently, caffeine acts as a powerful hallucinogen to the Vrex neural structure. The Supreme Hive Commander reported visions of tiny dancing creatures and composed 17 volumes of cosmic poetry before the effects wore off. "We're so sorry," Reynolds had apologized, while not appearing remotely sorry. "Cultural exchange is complicated, right?" By the 3rd summit, the pattern was established. The humans would arrive, engage in their baffling social rituals, and insist on sitting in the back row of the chamber. Many species simply avoided them. Others observed them as curiosities. A few mostly younger representatives from the more adventurous cultures actually sought them out. They tell entertaining stories, explain junior diplomat tricks of the Celandine Republic, and they bring these flavor tablets called candy that produce fascinating sensory experiences. Perhaps most peculiar was how the humans behaved during crisis situations. The evacuation drill during the 4th summit revealed their strange priorities. While most species gathered their most valuable possessions or important documents, the humans grabbed nothing but immediately helped direct traffic flow to the exits. They seemed to have memorized every evacuation route despite never being provided with the station schematics. Safety First Reynolds had cheerfully explained when I questioned him. Just a human thing. A human thing indeed. Looking back now, as I observed them taking their usual positions at the back of the chamber for this fifth summit, I wonder how we all missed the signs. The careful positioning, the constant awareness of exits, the way they maintained physical fitness despite the artificial gravity. We categorized humans as non-threatening because they lacked natural weapons, as primitive because their technology seemed unsophisticated, as weak because they avoided confrontation. What a magnificent deception it was. The Fifth Galactic Confederation Summit proceeded with its usual tedious efficiency. 17 trade agreements ratified, 23 territorial disputes mediated, 1 declaration of cosmic heritage protection for the sentient coral formations of Deneb IV. Standard procedure called for a ceremonial reception on the third day, a glorified social function where delegates consumed nutritional supplements compatible with their biochemistry while pretending to enjoy each other's company. These events were held in the Grand Observatory of Proxima Station, a magnificent transparent dome offering stunning views of Betelgeuse solar prominences. Architects from 7 species had collaborated on its design, creating a space that could accommodate everyone from methane breathers to silicon-based lifeforms. I was recording a particularly heated debate between the quantum collective and the binary autocracy about mathematical philosophy when the first tremor shook the station. Attention all delegates, the station's AI announced with inappropriate calm. Minor gravitational anomalies detected. Please continue your scheduled activities. The humans exchanged glances. That's not a gravitational anomaly, Dr. Fleming muttered, setting down his champagne flute. Ambassador Reynolds nodded slightly, and the human delegation casually began moving toward the edges of the room. Not rushing, not drawing attention. Just a subtle repositioning that placed them near support columns and away from the vast transparent sections of the dome. Curious, I followed them, all 6 of my eyes tracking their movements. Ambassador Crix Reynolds acknowledged me with a nod. Enjoying the reception. Your delegation appears concerned, I observed. Torres forced a smile. Just stretching our legs. Humans get restless. The second tremor was stronger. The massive chandelier, a gift from the crystalline hegemony, swayed ominously. Attention all delegates, the AI repeated. We are experiencing technical difficulties with the station stabilizers. There is no cause for alarm. There's always cause for alarm when they say there's no cause for alarm, Fleming whispered. The third tremor wasn't a tremor at all. It was an explosion. The observatory dome fractured, not enough to cause decompression, but enough to send spiderweb cracks across its surface. Delegates panicked. The methane breathers released stress gases. The Targans extended battle spikes. The Mist Elders condensed into defensive formations. Security breach in sectors 7 through 12, the AI announced, its voice modulating to emergency protocols. All delegates proceed to designated evacuation points. This is not a drill. That's when we heard them. Harsh, guttural vocalizations echoing through the station's communication system. Vorg gasped, a delegate from the Regelian Compact. The station is under attack by the Vorg. I should explain. The Vorg weren't members of the Confederation. They were a predatory species that refused all diplomatic contact, attacking settlements and ships across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Physically imposing, technologically advanced, and utterly dedicated to what they called the culling, their belief that only the strongest species deserved to exist. They were the nightmare that kept the Confederation unified despite its differences. Chaos erupted in the observatory. Dignitaries scrambled for exits. Security protocols activated, sealing certain passageways to contain the breach. The station's defensive systems engaged with a low hum that vibrated through the floor plating. And the humans. They were already moving. This way, Reynolds called out, not just to his delegation but to everyone nearby. This junction connects to the auxiliary maintenance corridor. How do you know that? Demanded a representative from the Silicon Directorate. We studied the station schematics, Torres replied, as if this were perfectly normal behavior for guests. Reynolds pressed his hand against a seemingly solid wall panel, which slid open to reveal a narrow passage. This will take us to emergency bay 12. It's not on the main evacuation route, so the Vorg probably won't target it immediately. I found myself following the humans, along with 23 other delegates from 17 species. None of us questioned why we were following these primitives. Something in their confident manner simply inspired compliance. The maintenance corridor was cramped and poorly lit, clearly not designed for evacuation. Yet the humans navigated it with practiced ease, occasionally consulting small electronic devices they pulled from hidden pockets. Station defenses are engaging in Sectors 9 and 10, Fleming reported, studying his device. But Vorg breacher units have already penetrated to the inner rings. Main evacuation routes are compromised. How are you accessing this information? I asked. These are secure Confederation tactical feeds. Fleming didn't even look up. I wrote a bypass algorithm last summit when I was bored during the tariff discussions. We emerged into a small docking bay containing 6 emergency escape pods, each designed to accommodate 20 passengers of various physiologies. Standard Confederation safety protocols. The pods are locked down, hissed a Celandine diplomat, pointing to the red security lights above each vessel. Standard procedure during hostile boarding actions, Reynolds explained. Prevents the attackers from escaping with hostages. He turned to Fleming. Can you override it? The scientist was already connecting his device to the bay's control panel. Give me 40 seconds. Through the reinforced viewports, we could see flashes of weapons fire in the distance. The station's external defense systems engaging Vorg boarding craft. A massive Vorg warship loomed in the background, its organic-looking hull bristling with weapon emplacements. Why are they attacking a Confederation summit? Whispered a terrified delegate from the Aquatic Consortium, their breathing apparatus bubbling frantically. It's unprecedented. Opportunity, Reynolds responded grimly. All the major powers in one place. Take out the leadership, throw the galaxy into chaos. Got it, Fleming announced as the security lights switched from red to green. Pods are unlocked and prepped for launch. Reynolds turned to the assembled delegates. We need to split into groups of 20. Each pod has enough life support for 3 days at maximum capacity. Head for the nearest Confederation outpost at Barnard's Star. What about the other delegates? I asked, suddenly remembering my colleagues trapped in different parts of the station. There are over 5,000 representatives and staff aboard. Reynolds' expression darkened. Station security will handle the main evacuation. But if the Vorg take control of the central systems... He didn't need to finish the thought. We all knew what the Vorg did to captured enemies. The floor beneath us shuddered as another explosion rocked the station. Closer this time. They're moving faster than expected, Torres muttered, checking a small weapon she'd somehow produced from within her formal diplomatic attire. A weapon that definitely violated at least 16 Confederation protocols about armed delegates. I suddenly realized that all the humans were armed. Not obviously no visible holsters or bandoliers, but each had casually positioned their hands near hidden weapons. Ambassador Crix, Reynolds addressed me directly. Your observational capabilities would be valuable. Will you coordinate loading the delegates into the pods while we secure the perimeter? Before I could respond, the bay doors on the opposite side of the chamber began to cycle open. Incoming, Fleming warned, taking cover behind a structural support. Could be station security or... The doors slid apart to reveal 3 hulking figures in biomechanical armor. Vorg breacher units. Elite shock troops known for their brutality. Or it could be them. Fleming finished, already raising what looked like a primitive projectile weapon. The universe seemed to slow as I processed what happened next. The supposedly weak, primitive humans moved with coordinated precision that would impress even the warrior casters of the Targon Imperium. Reynolds fired a small device that expanded into a glowing energy barrier, providing cover for the delegates. Torres rolled forward and discharged her weapon, hitting the lead Vorg in what appeared to be a joint in its armor. Fleming circled to the flank, his projectile weapon making a rapid chattering sound as it launched dozens of tiny penetrators that found gaps in the second Vorg's protection. The third Vorg warrior charged forward, its serrated combat blade aiming for the closest delegate, a mist elder whose pressure vessel offered no protection against physical attacks. What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about human capabilities. Dr. Elena Petrov, the human cultural attaché who had spent most of the summit sketching portraits of other delegates as friendship gifts, stepped directly into the Vorg's path. She moved with impossible speed, ducking under the blade and driving some kind of reinforced knuckle weapon up into the underside of the Vorg's helmet. The Vorg, a creature that could withstand direct energy weapon impacts, staggered backward. Petrov pressed her advantage, a flurry of strikes targeting nerve clusters and joint articulations with surgical precision. At the delegates to the pods, she called out, never taking her eyes off her opponent. We'll hold them here. The delegates didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled toward the escape vessels, panic overriding dignity and protocol. I remained frozen, all 6 of my eyes recording every detail of this impossible scene. The humans, the soft, squishy primitives we had patronizingly welcomed into galactic society, were engaging Vorg warriors in direct combat. And they were winning. Ambassador Crix Reynolds shouted, breaking my trance. We could use your observation skills. Are there more hostiles approaching? I extended my sensory perception, focusing on vibrations through the station structure and subtle changes in air pressure patterns. 2 more units approaching from the eastern corridor, I reported, approximately 40 seconds away. Reynolds nodded as if I'd confirmed his own assessment. Time to go. Everyone in the pods. Now. As the last delegates crowded into the escape vessels, I found myself in the final pod with Reynolds and Torres. Fleming and Petrov had moved to defensive positions covering our evacuation. What about your colleagues? I asked as the pod doors began to close. Reynolds tapped his communication device. Plan Omega Team. Rendezvous is at checkpoint 3. Fleming and Petrov acknowledged with quick nods before the pod doors sealed completely. Our vessel detached from the station with a lurch, automatic systems firing thrusters to put distance between us and the conflict. Through the viewports, we could see dozens of other escape pods jettisoning from different parts of Proxima Station. They'll be fine, Torres said, noticing my attention on the shrinking figures of their colleagues. This isn't their first evacuation. What exactly does that mean? I demanded, my patience for human evasiveness finally exhausted. What aren't you telling us about humanity? Reynolds and Torres exchanged glances, the kind of look that passes between conspirators who've been discovered. I think Reynolds said carefully, it's time we had an honest conversation about why humans always sit at the back of the room. The escape pod hurtled through space, its automated systems plotting an evasion course away from Proxima Station. 20 of us were crammed inside representatives from 17 different species and 3 humans. The air recyclers hummed as they worked overtime to accommodate our diverse respiratory needs. Ambassador Reynolds demanded the Axiom Lord, their crystalline form pulsating with agitation. Explain yourselves immediately. Your delegation's actions suggest prior knowledge of this attack. Not prior knowledge, Reynolds corrected. Preparation for possibility. I focused all 6 of my eyes on the humans. You've been expecting something like this since you joined the Confederation, haven't you? Torres nodded, checking something on her small device. We've been running contingency planning for various crisis scenarios since our first summit. It's standard procedure for our diplomatic corps. Standard procedure. The delegate from the Silicon Directorate vibrated in what translated as incredulous laughter, to prepare for an attack that hasn't happened in 7 centuries of Confederation history. Reynolds leaned forward, his expression serious. Where we come from, peace is the exception, not the rule. We plan for worst-case scenarios because we've lived through them. The pod's communication system crackled to life. Emergency channels only. Identify yourselves. Torres activated the response system. Emergency Pod 12. Ambassador Torres, Earth delegation, with 19 delegates from Confederation member species. Request status update. A moment of static, then verified. Situation critical. Proxima Station central systems compromised. Vorg forces controlling main docking bays and central ring. Confederation security establishing defensive perimeter in outer sectors. What about evacuation progress? Reynolds asked. Approximately 62% of delegates successfully evacuated. Remaining personnel trapped in sectors with Vorg presence. The Mist Elder's containment vessel pulsed with distress patterns. Thousands still aboard. The Vorg will take hostages or worse. Reynolds exchanged glances with Torres. Something unspoken passed between them. Request permission to transmit on secure channel Delta 9, Torres said to the communication system. A pause, then acknowledged. Channel secured. Torres spoke rapidly into her communication device in what I recognized as a specialized Earth military code, not the standard diplomatic language they normally used. After a moment, she nodded to Reynolds. Our people are coordinating with other evacuees. Fleming's group has linked up with Confederation security forces. Petrov is leading a team of volunteers to secure an evacuation corridor for delegates trapped in the observatory sector. Your cultural attaché is leading a tactical operation. I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Torres gave me a look that I now recognized as pity. Elena Petrov was our cultural attaché. Yes, she was also a commander in Earth's Special Operations Division for 12 years before joining the Diplomatic Corps. As was I, Torres added. As are all members of Human First Contact teams. The revelations were coming too quickly for even my multi-hemispheric brain to process fully. You're all. Military personnel asked the representative from the Aquatic Consortium. We prefer security specialist, Reynolds corrected. Most of us have combat experience, yes. It's considered a prerequisite for extraterrestrial diplomatic service. But why the Salandine diplomat's sensory fronds waved in confusion? The Galactic Confederation has maintained peace for millennia. Your peace, Reynolds said quietly. Not everyone's. The escape pod's view screen showed a tactical display of nearby space. Dozens of evacuation vessels were converging on the predetermined rally point. In the distance, we could see Confederation defense ships engaging the Vorg warship, energy weapons flashing in the vacuum. Perhaps this is the time for complete honesty. Ambassador Reynolds, I suggested. Why does humanity always choose to sit at the back of the chamber during Confederation proceedings? Reynolds sighed, leaning back against the pod's bulkhead. When I was in military training back on Earth, my first instructor taught us something I never forgot. He said, always sit at the back of the room. Know where the exits are. Have a plan to get out. Torres nodded. It's not paranoia if it keeps you alive. But the Confederation has been at peace, began the Silicon Directorate representative. The Confederation has been comfortable, Reynolds corrected. There's a difference. We noticed it immediately when we joined. Your security protocols are outdated. Your emergency response systems are theoretical rather than practical. Your delegates have no survival training. We haven't needed such things, protested the Axiom Lord. Until today, Torres pointed out. The communication system activated again. All evacuation vessels be advised. Vorg warship has launched pursuit craft. Evasive protocols recommended. Reynolds moved to the pod's control interface. Computer, how many of these vessels have manual override capabilities? Manual override is available, but not recommended, responded the artificial intelligence. Automated systems are optimized for passenger safety. Override safety protocols. Authorization Reynolds Alpha 37. How do you have override authorization? I demanded. Those codes are restricted to Confederation senior security personnel. Reynolds didn't answer, his focus entirely on the control systems. Torres, can you get me a tactical display of all nearby vessels? She tapped rapidly on her device. Uploading to the main screen now. The view screen changed to show the positions of all evacuation pods. Small red indicators appeared, marking the approaching Vorg pursuit craft. They're targeting the main evacuation routes, Reynolds observed. Standard predatory tactic, go for the largest groups first. Can we help them? Asked the Salandine diplomat. We're going to try. Reynolds opened a communication channel. Attention all Earth delegation personnel. This is Reynolds. Implement Protocol Shepard. I repeat, Protocol Shepard. Within moments, several evacuation pods changed course. Rather than continuing toward the rally point, they began moving in seemingly random patterns. What are they doing? Asked the Mist Elder. Drawing attention, Torres explained. Creating alternate targets to confuse the pursuit vessels. Your people are deliberately making themselves targets, the Silicon Directorate representative's voice modulator expressed shock. They're creating a diversion, I realized, my multiple eyes tracking the tactical display, to give the other pods a chance to escape. Reynolds nodded grimly. It's what we do. The display showed Vorg pursuit craft changing course, dividing to chase the new targets. The human-controlled pods executed complex evasive maneuvers that should have been impossible with civilian evacuation vessels. How are they flying like that? The aquatic consortium delegate's breathing apparatus bubbled rapidly. These pods aren't designed for combat maneuvers. We modified them, Torres said simply. During each summit, we made small improvements to the emergency systems. Nothing that would trigger security alerts, just enough to give us options if we needed them. You've been preparing for this scenario for 5 years, I stated, finally understanding. Since your first summit. We prepare for every scenario, Reynolds corrected. It's a human thing. The communication system crackled again. A different voice this time, Dr. Fleming. Reynolds, we've linked up with Confederation security. They're establishing a defensive perimeter, but they need time. Petrov's team has secured an evacuation corridor in Sector 12. They're moving delegates to secondary escape pods now. Status on the Vorg flagship, Reynolds asked. Still engaged with Confederation forces. Their boarding parties are isolated to specific sectors of the station. Reynolds studied the tactical display. They weren't expecting resistance. This was supposed to be a quick strike against an unprepared target. Which it would have been, Torres added, if not for the emergency protocols we implemented. I watched the display as more evacuation pods safely reached the rally point. The diversionary tactics of the human-controlled vessels were working, drawing Vorg pursuers away from the main evacuation routes. Why, I finally asked. Why go to such lengths for a confederation that has, by your own admission, underestimated and patronized humanity since first contact? Reynolds turned to me, his expression softer than I expected. Ambassador Crix, on Earth we have a concept called disaster preparedness. Throughout our history, the societies that survived weren't always the strongest or the most advanced, they were the ones that prepared for the unexpected. We sit at the back of the room, Torres continued, because it gives us the best view of everything happening. We learn the evacuation routes not because we're afraid, but because knowledge improves survival odds. We maintain physical fitness in artificial gravity because capabilities matter in a crisis. But why help everyone else? Press the axiom, Lord. Your species could have simply ensured its own survival. The humans exchanged glances again, but this time I recognized something different in their expression. Not conspiracy, but something more fundamental. Because that's not who we are, Reynolds said simply. Humanity learned long ago that survival isn't just about the strongest individual making it out alive. It's about preserving what matters, and sometimes that means putting yourself at risk to help others. The pod's view screen showed a Vorg pursuit craft closing in on one of the human-controlled diversionary pods. At the last moment, the pod executed a maneuver that should have been physically impossible, causing the Vorg vessel to overshoot. The pod then accelerated directly toward a second pursuer, forcing it to change course abruptly. Who's piloting that pod? I asked, amazed at the tactical brilliance. Torres checked her device. That would be Dr. Petrov's wife, Melissa. She's our botanical research specialist. Your botanical researcher can fly like that? Reynolds smiled slightly. Before she studied plants, she flew combat interceptors. Most humans have multiple skill sets. The communication system activated once more. All evacuation vessels. Confederation reinforcements arriving. Repeat, reinforcements arriving. The view screen showed a fleet of Confederation warships emerging from hyperspace, weapons systems engaging the Vorg vessels immediately. Looks like the cavalry has arrived, Torres remarked. Cavalry, the translator struggled with the reference. Historical military reinforcements, Reynolds explained. It means help is here. As the Confederation fleet engaged the Vorg warship, the pursuit craft broke off their attacks, returning to defend their flagship. The evacuation pods, including those piloted by humans, regrouped and continued toward the rally point. They'll retreat soon, Reynolds predicted, watching the tactical display. The Vorg don't commit to battles they can't win. Sure enough, within minutes the Vorg vessels disengaged, jumping to hyperspace with the damaged remnants of their fleet. A collective release of tension passed through the pod. Various species expressed relief according to their physiologies. The mist elder condensed, the celandines fronds relaxed, The Silicon Directorate representative's vibrations slowed to a gentle hum. Ambassador Reynolds, the Axiom Lord, addressed the human formally. I believe the Confederation owes humanity a debt of gratitude and perhaps an apology. Reynolds shook his head. No apology necessary. We understood our role from the beginning. Your role, I questioned. Earth has a saying Torres offered. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. We hoped the Confederation's peace would last forever. We prepared in case it didn't, which is why humans always sit at the back of the room. I concluded, understanding finally dawning across all my brain hemispheres. Reynolds nodded, a slight smile forming. Exactly. Because someone needs to be watching the door when trouble walks in. The Confederation rally point was chaotic but organized, a testament to emergency protocols that, while dusty from disuse, still functioned when needed. A massive space station orbiting Barnard's star served as the designated emergency gathering location, its docking bays filled with escape pods and rescue vessels. 324 delegates still unaccounted for, announced the Confederation security commander, a towering Targon whose exoskeleton bristled with concern. Proxima Station remains partially under Vorg control. We had gathered in the station's central command center a hastily assembled crisis committee, including senior representatives from each major Confederation power block. I was present as the official recorder, my 6 eyes capturing every detail of this historic emergency session. Ambassador Reynolds stood beside a holographic display of Proxima Station, studying the red highlighted sections indicating Vorg presence. Torres and Fleming flanked him, having reunited with us after our arrival at the rally point. Dr. Petrov was still aboard one of the rescue vessels, coordinating evacuation efforts. The Vorg have established control nodes in these 3 sectors, Fleming explained, pointing to specific areas of the station. They've reconfigured the station's internal defenses to prevent conventional assault. Impossible, stated the high technician of the Silicon Directorate. Proxima's systems cannot be reconfigured without Confederation security codes. Fleming exchanged a glance with Reynolds. The Vorg appear to have obtained valid security codes. They bypassed primary and secondary firewalls without triggering alerts. A murmur of alarm spread through the assembled representatives. The implications were clear: either the Vorg had developed unprecedented hacking capabilities, or the Confederation had a security breach. How long until a military response can be mounted, asked the Axiom Lord. The Targon commander's exoskeleton clicked in frustration. Our nearest battle group is 9 hours away. The vessels currently engaging the Vorg are primarily defensive escorts, not assault capable. 9 hours is too long, Reynolds said quietly. The Vorg will either fortify their position beyond our ability to breach it, or they'll execute the hostages to eliminate witnesses. Then we must negotiate, suggested the representative from the Aquatic Consortium, their breathing apparatus bubbling anxiously. Offer concessions in exchange for the safe return of our people. Torres shook her head. The Vorg don't negotiate. They consider it weakness, and you are suddenly experts on Vorg psychology. The Quantum Collective representative's voice modulator conveyed skepticism. We've studied every encounter between the Confederation and the Vorg for the past 5 years, Fleming replied. Every engagement, every intercepted communication, every tactical outcome. Why, I asked, genuinely curious. The Vorg are a minimal threat to Earth. Your system isn't even in their expansion vector. Reynolds turned to face the assembled delegates. Because understanding potential adversaries is basic security protocol, something the Confederation seems to have forgotten during its centuries of comfortable peace. His words stung, but none could dispute their truth. The Vorg had been treated as a distant nuisance, not a legitimate threat until today. If we cannot wait and we cannot negotiate, the Targon commander summarized, what options remain? Reynolds looked to Torres and Fleming, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We counterattack, he stated. Immediately. With what we have available, preposterous, huffed the Mist Elder, their containment vessel pulsing with dismissal patterns. Our available forces are insufficient. Not if we employ unconventional tactics, Reynolds continued. He gestured to the holographic display. The Vorg expect a conventional response, a direct assault with overwhelming force. They've positioned their defenses accordingly. But if we approach from an unexpected vector with unexpected resources? Fleming tapped his device, and the holographic display zoomed in on a seemingly innocuous section of Proxima Station, a maintenance access point near the station's waste reclamation system. No one would consider this a viable entry point, he explained. The access tunnels are barely large enough for maintenance drones. Station blueprints show it as a dead end, but it's not. Torres added, because human maintenance technicians modified it during the third summit to create an emergency access route. Silence fell over the command center as the implications sank in. You've been modifying Proxima Station without authorization, the Quantum Collective representative's modulator cycled through tones of outrage. We prefer to call it enhancing evacuation options, Reynolds replied calmly. And given today's events, I'd say it was justified. These modifications, the Targon commander interjected, cutting off further protest. How extensive are they? Fleming displayed a series of overlays on the holographic station schematic. Secret access points, bypassed security systems, hidden emergency caches. You've built a shadow infrastructure within our most secure facility, the Silicon Directorate representative observed. Not accusatory, but impressed. We've created options, Reynolds corrected. And right now, those options represent our best chance to rescue the remaining delegates. What exactly are you proposing? Ambassador, I asked, all 6 of my eyes focused on him. Reynolds straightened, suddenly every inch the military commander rather than the diplomat. A small strike team, entering through the waste reclamation access point. We bypassed the Vorg security by using our modified routes, neutralize their control nodes, and restore station systems to Confederation control. A small team cannot stand against Vorg warriors, objected the Axiom Lord. Their combat capabilities are legendary. Torres allowed herself a small smile. So are ours. When properly motivated, you're volunteering. The Targon commander's exoskeleton rippled with surprise. The Earth delegation has 27 personnel currently at this rally point, Reynolds confirmed. All with combat training. We've already begun preparing equipment and tactical plans. Why would you risk your lives when the Confederation's own forces wait for reinforcements? Asked the Mist Elder. Reynolds looked at each of the assembled delegates in turn. Because every minute we delay, more lives are at risk. Because we have the capabilities and the opportunity to act. And because this is what humans do. What humans do, repeated the Axiom Lord, crystalline form pulsating thoughtfully. You've referred to this concept several times, Ambassador. Perhaps you could elaborate. Reynolds glanced at his colleagues before responding. Throughout our history, humans have faced extinction-level threats multiple times. Natural disasters, plagues, wars, climate collapse. Each time, what saved us wasn't just technology or strength, it was our capacity to adapt, to plan for contingencies, and most importantly, to help each other even at great personal risk. We call them first responders, Torres added. People who run toward danger instead of away from it is. Not rational, observed the Silicon Directorate representative. The optimal survival strategy is self-preservation. For individuals, perhaps Fleming acknowledged. But for a species, for a civilization, the optimal strategy is collective action, even when it requires individual sacrifice. The command center fell silent as the delegates processed this concept. So you sit at the back of the room, I said slowly, not out of fear or discomfort, but so you can see everything, plan escape routes, and be the last ones out, ensuring everyone else gets to safety first. Reynolds nodded. It's a responsibility we've shouldered for so long it's become instinct. Well, the Targon commander's voice cut through the philosophical discussion. Your instincts appear to be what we need right now. What resources do you require for this counterattack? With that simple question, the mood in the command center transformed. The debate about human motivations gave way to practical planning. Fleming projected tactical overlays. Torres liaised with the human strike team members. Reynolds coordinated with Confederation security forces. I observed it all, recording the remarkable efficiency with which these supposedly primitive beings organized a high-risk rescue operation with minimal resources. Within 2 hours, the plan was set. 3 assault shuttles would create a diversion at Proxima Station's main docking bays, drawing Vorg attention. Meanwhile, a modified maintenance vessel would approach from the station's underside, delivering the human strike team to the waste reclamation access point. Once inside, Fleming explained to the assembled command staff, we'll split into 3 teams. Alpha Team will restore central environmental systems, ensuring life support remains stable. Beta Team will secure the primary data core, preventing the Vorg from extracting Confederation intelligence. Gamma Team will free the hostages and establish an evacuation corridor. You make it sound simple, remarked the Quantum Collective representative. The plan is simple, Reynolds agreed. Execution will be the challenge. As the human team prepared for departure, I approached Reynolds in the shuttle bay. His team was checking equipment, a mixture of standard Confederation security gear and modified human devices I didn't recognize. Ambassador, I addressed him formally. As the official recorder of these events, I request permission to accompany your strike team. All 6 of my eyes registered his surprise. That's not advisable, Ambassador Crix. This will be a high-risk operation. Precisely why it should be documented. The Confederation needs to understand what happens today, not just the outcome, but the process. Reynolds studied me for a moment. Your observational capabilities would be valuable, he acknowledged. But can you defend yourself if necessary? I extended my rarely used defensive membranes, sharp-edged and capable of secreting a paralytic toxin. Syntherians evolved as apex predators, Ambassador. We simply chose diplomacy over dominance, a choice, not a limitation. His eyebrows raised slightly. Noted. Welcome to the team, Ambassador Crix. As we boarded the maintenance vessel, I positioned myself near Reynolds and Torres at the command station. 24 humans checked weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency, their movements precise and coordinated. Strike team. Comms check, Torres called out. Each team member responded in sequence, confirming operational readiness. Mission parameters locked, Fleming reported from his station. Proxima approach vector calculated to minimize detection probability. Reynolds addressed the assembled team. You all know the stakes. This isn't just about saving Confederation delegates, though that's reason enough. This is about showing the Vorg and the galaxy that predatory behavior will not be rewarded. That peace isn't maintained by comfort or complacency, but by readiness and resolve. He paused, looking at each team member in turn. We always sit at the back of the room, because someone needs to watch the door. Today, we're not just watching, we're going through it. Stay sharp, follow the plan, protect each other. The humans responded with determined nods, and a phrase one never heard before but instantly understood the meaning of leave no one behind. As our vessel detached from the rally point station and accelerated toward Proxima, I realized I was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just a military operation, but the revelation of humanity's true nature to the galaxy. They weren't the weak, primitive species we'd patronizingly welcomed into the Confederation. They were its guardians, its first responders, its last line of defense. And they had been preparing for this moment since they first sat down at the back of the room. The 6th Galactic Confederation Summit opened with unprecedented ceremony. The Grand Chamber, rebuilt after the Vorg attack on Proxima Station, gleamed with new security features artfully integrated into its design. Subtle but significant changes were evident to those who knew what to look for, and as the official recorder, I noticed everything. Reinforced bulkheads disguised as architectural flourishes, biometric scanners embedded in decorative archways, emergency evacuation routes clearly marked in 17 different sensory formats. The chamber preserved its dignity while acknowledging a new reality. I stood at my usual observation post, all 6 of my eyes surveying the assembled delegates. Representatives from 2,843 species filled the chamber, their varied physiologies accommodated by adaptive seating technologies. The atmosphere was subdued yet resolute. The Vorg attack had left scars, both physical and psychological. 307 delegates had been lost that day. Their names were now inscribed on a memorial wall that dominated the chamber's eastern face, but the toll would have been far higher without the intervention of humanity. The counterattack led by the human strike team had succeeded against overwhelming odds. Using their secret access points and modified routes, they had infiltrated Vorg-controlled sections of Proxima Station. In a series of coordinated strikes, they neutralized control nodes, restored station systems, and established evacuation corridors for trapped delegates. I had recorded it all, the precision of their movements, the effectiveness of their improvised tactics, the selflessness of their actions. When 2 human team members were wounded covering the retreat of Mist Elder delegates, their colleagues refused to leave them behind, executing a daring extraction under heavy fire. Before the Vorg attack, such behavior would have been dismissed as primitive emotionalism. Now, it was recognized as something else entirely, something the Confederation had forgotten during its long peace. The Grand Arbiter's resonant tone signaled the start of proceedings. Esteemed representatives of the Galactic Confederation, We gather once more in the spirit of unity, progress and vigilance. That last word, vigilance, was new to the traditional opening. A small change that acknowledged a larger shift in perspective. The Earth delegation entered the chamber last, as protocol dictated for the newest member species. Ambassador Reynolds led his team, now expanded to include specialists in security integration and emergency response. They wore their formal diplomatic attire, indistinguishable from previous summits, except for one detail: small pins bearing the emblem of Proxima Station, a silent tribute to what had occurred there. What happened next broke with 5 centuries of established Confederation protocol. As the humans moved toward their designated seating area, the Targon delegation rose from their positions. Their massive forms, encased in ceremonial battle armor, stood at attention, a warrior's salute historically reserved for proven combat equals. The Silicon Directorate representatives followed, their crystalline structures pulsing with the blue light of acknowledgement, a gesture previously accorded only to entities of superior computational capability. One by one, delegations throughout the chamber rose or enacted their species equivalent gestures of respect. The Mist Elders condensed into honor formations. The Axiom Lords generated harmonic resonance patterns. The Quantum Collectives synchronized their phase states. Reynolds paused, visibly moved by this unprecedented display. He exchanged glances with his team before offering a formal bow, a human gesture of reciprocal respect. Ambassador Reynolds, the Grand Arbiter, addressed him directly, another break with tradition. The Confederation Security Council has voted unanimously to implement what we are calling the human protocols across all Confederation facilities. We would be honored if Earth would oversee their implementation. Reynolds nodded. Earth stands ready to serve the Confederation in any capacity required. Grand Arbiter, then please. The Arbiter continued. Take your delegation's new assigned positions. I watched with particular interest as Reynolds was directed not to the back of the chamber, but to a newly created section near the center, positions traditionally reserved for founding members of the Confederation. With respect, Grand Arbiter Reynolds said carefully, while we appreciate the honor, my delegation would prefer to maintain our previous seating arrangements. A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. You wish to return to the back rows? The Arbiter's tone conveyed surprise. After your service to the Confederation, you are entitled to positions of prominence. Reynolds smiled slightly. The back of the room suits us, Grand Arbiter. Old habits and all that. Very well, the Arbiter conceded. The Earth delegation may choose their preferred seating. As Reynolds led his team toward their usual positions at the back of the chamber, I noticed something remarkable. Throughout the Grand Hall, delegates from dozens of species were quietly gathering their materials and moving away from their assigned prestigious positions. The Targon security chief relocated his delegation to positions flanking the eastern emergency exit. A group of Celandine diplomats established themselves near the western evacuation route. Even a contingent of Axiom Lords, traditionally insistent on center chamber positioning, shifted to the southern perimeter where they could observe the entire proceedings. By the time the formal roll call began, nearly 30% of the delegates had repositioned themselves to the chamber's edges and back rows, each near an exit, each with clear sightlines to the entire assembly, each emulating the humans. Reynolds noticed this too, his expression shifting from surprise to understanding to quiet pride. He caught my gaze across the chamber and nodded slightly in acknowledgement between recorders of history. The Grand Arbiter, adapting to this spontaneous reorganization with admirable flexibility, proceeded with the summit's agenda. New security protocols were unanimously approved. A memorial fleet was commissioned to patrol the Proxima sector. The trade agreements and territorial disputes were addressed with renewed focus on mutual security. When the day's session concluded, I made my way through the dispersing delegates to where Reynolds stood conversing with representatives from species that had previously avoided human contact. Ambassador Crix, he greeted me warmly. Your account of the Proxima incident has been circulating throughout Confederation space. Quite the historical document. I recorded what I observed. I replied simply. Though I admit, my perspective on what I was observing changed considerably during the events. As did everyone's. Noted the Targon security chief who had joined our conversation. Your species has introduced some uncomfortable concepts to the Confederation, Ambassador Reynolds. Uncomfortable, but necessary, added an Axiom Lord. We had forgotten that peace requires vigilance. Reynolds shrugged slightly, that quintessentially human gesture of modesty. We simply brought our own experiences to the table. Every species contributes in their own way. Indeed, I agreed. Though I am curious about one thing, Ambassador. Now that your delegation's approach has been validated indeed, emulated, why insist on returning to the back rows? Surely you've earned the right to sit at the center of Confederation affairs. Reynolds looked around the chamber, noting the new distribution of delegates, so many now positioned near exits, oriented for optimal observation, prepared rather than comfortable. The back of the room still has the best view, he said with a small smile. Besides, old habits die hard, and new habits form quickly, observed the Targon, indicating the repositioned delegations. I suspect the chamber's seating arrangements will never be the same. Change is the only constant in the universe, offered the axiom Lord philosophically. As our conversation continued, I activated my secondary observation membranes, recording this moment for the official archives. The Galactic Confederation had existed for millennia, adapting gradually to new challenges and incorporating new members. But never in my extensive studies had I witnessed such a fundamental shift in perspective occur so rapidly. All because a supposedly primitive species had insisted on sitting at the back of the room. Later that evening, during the summit's reception event now held in a space with 14 clearly marked evacuation routes, I found Reynolds alone on an observation deck, looking out at the stars. Your delegation has made quite an impression, I noted, joining him at the viewport. There are already proposals to incorporate human emergency preparedness methodologies into education curricula across Confederation worlds. Good, he said simply. Knowledge saves lives. It does indeed. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been circulating in diplomatic circles since Proxima. Ambassador, was Earth truly as unprepared for first contact as you appeared to be? The enthusiastic scientist, the diplomats breaching protocols. Was it all an act to seem non-threatening? Reynolds laughed softly. No, Dr. Martinez was genuinely that excited. We really did accidentally activate quantum comfort settings. Humans are naturally curious, sometimes to a fault. But he paused, choosing his words carefully. Being underestimated has certain advantages. It's a strategic deception, I observed. Not deception. Just selective emphasis. We showed you our wonder, our enthusiasm, our desire for friendship, all genuine aspects of humanity. We simply didn't advertise our preparedness or combat capabilities until they were needed. A wise approach, I acknowledged. Though one wonders what other capabilities Earth might possess that remain. Selectively emphasized, Reynolds smiled enigmatically. Every species has its secrets, Ambassador Crix. The true measure of civilization is not what powers we possess, but when and why we choose to use them. The viewport's angle shifted as the station rotated, bringing the rebuilt Proxima station into view. Its lights glowed steadily against the void, a testament to resilience and renewal. You know, Reynolds said reflectively, back on Earth, there's an old saying: the most dangerous person in the room is the one quietly sitting in the corner, watching everything. I considered this, because they might be a threat sometimes, but more often, because they're the ones who notice when something's wrong. They see the fire starting before others smell the smoke. They know where the exits are when panic breaks out. He turned to face me directly. They're the ones who've been preparing while everyone else was comfortable. As the 6th Galactic Confederation Summit continued over the following days, I observed a transformation spreading throughout the proceedings. Delegates who had never spoken directly now exchanged security protocol calls. Species with historical animosities collaborated on emergency response simulations. The Confederation was changing, becoming not just a political entity but a mutual protection community. And throughout it all, the humans remained in their preferred positions at the back of the room, watching, preparing, ready to respond. In my final official record of the summit, I included a personal observation that would be quoted in Confederation historical texts for centuries to come. The true strength of a species cannot be measured by physical power, technological advancement, or even intellectual capacity. Rather, it is revealed in their instinctive response to crisis, whether they turn inward to protect themselves alone, or outward to ensure the survival of all. Humanity's habit of sitting at the back of the room was never a sign of insecurity or deference, but the natural positioning of those who have shouldered the burden of vigilance for so long. It has become instinct. Perhaps the most valuable contribution Earth has made to the Galactic Confederation is not their emergency protocols or defensive strategies, but the simple reminder that lasting peace comes not from comfort, but from readiness, and that true security is found not in isolation, but in our commitment to each other. Sometimes, the most important perspective in the room comes from those quietly watching from the back row.